Good evening, merry drinkers. Tonight we're going to be talking about Lambic Beer, probably the original, longest existing beer. Going all the way back to the Egyptians, there's probably one or two bits of the brewing process have been missed out, but this bit brewed in the Pajottenland in Belgium. And it's not exclusive to there, anyway I can call it a Lambic, but out of degree of respect, a Lambic beer will only come from that area to the southwest of Brussels. And as we go through, we're going to be trying a Kriek Boon, a beer I've not had before. It's a cherry lambic, but touch wood, it's a well represented of the style. So, what is a lambic beer? Well, if I stick up a map up, you've got Brussels, and then you've got the Zen Valley, which runs down. I mean, interestingly, you'll notice there's the Flanders region north of Belgium, north of Brussels as well, which does its own type of sour ale, so you get a sour Flanders. But Lambic is specific to this sort of like valley region. It's an old farmyard type of beer, and there's several styles. So you got a goose, a frambar, and then a Kriek, which we'll be trying shortly. They're fermented using wild yeasts, native to the area, and that's really what sort of brings it is. It's a wild beer. Sometimes it's referred to as a spontaneous type of beer. I'm not really in with that type of description. It's not like JC rocks out of church and turns the water into sour beer just in an instant. There's a bit of a brewing process goes to it, but the wild element is that they take a grist. So grist is about 60%, and then they use a local wheat, which is about 40%. And from that, they produce a really, really thick mash. I think it's got a specific type of phrase. I think it's called like a turbid mash. And rather with modern day brewing processes where you're trying to control the yeast and control all the temperatures and get involved to produce something that's quite standard, the good thing and the extraordinary thing about a lambic is that they'll just embrace the chaos. Whatever local yeast is involved, they'll be getting in there, and they try and really ramp it up at high temperatures. And the purpose of that is they want to keep sugars in the beer, so there's going to be yeast sort of like present everywhere. But once they're finished with that mash, it's like a really milky, odd colour, and they pump it up into the roof of the, barn sounds a bit insulting, but that's what it used to be. You sort of like brew down the bottom, you'd have it up on the top, and they have this great big open metal pan called a cool ship, and it's open to the air, so you'd have all these great big amounts of steam rising up, and there's little gaps just to the side of the roof line, just to allow the air in, so you got all this steam escaping around. But the local yeasts can sort of like come in, and that turbid mash has purposely left sugars in there. So whilst the other things have done it at their temperature, it gets really, really cold overnight. It gets down to about 8 degrees. It's only brewed in the winter months. And that 8 degrees allows these local sort of sour yeasts just to have a little nibble on those sugars and produce something that's really becomes quite acidic and lemony and sour, and produces sort of a very, very interesting and complex beer. Next stage onto that process is then they'll also store it into the barrel. So this is far from a quick process on a lambic. It's a very slow maturing type of beer that they produce. So they'll take the cool ship and they'll stick it into barrels, usually oak barrels. They're tended to be used for either wine, sherry or brandy, to add additional bits of flavour. And those barrels have probably been at the brewery. They're not fresh. It's not like a bourbon barrel where you might be looking to get loads of flavour in from the whiskey itself. There's yeast cultures also in the oak lining of those barrels, and so by storing the lambic in there's a secondary fermentation in the barrels itself to further add like a thickness and a complexity to the beer. And there's a local phrase in Belgium called bezomerd, which means your lambic has gone off. It's had too much summer. So the overnight temperatures being really low is quite key. So with global warming and warmer winters in Northern Europe, this type of beer is under serious pressure. They do add hops in, but hops aren't used for flavour. So they're just used as a preservative. So as opposed to an IPA where you'd want hops really fresh and stick them into the mix, and then you'd also want really, to drink that beer fresh. These have been hung up, they've been dried, all that fruit flavour is seeped out, and it's just used as a preservative, a bit like the old school English IPA that was taken over to India. They've popped those hops in just to make sure the beer isn't horrible by the time it reaches its destination, and so because of that, it gets a very dry and sometimes a bit of a cheesy finish. I know this beer's not sounding too appealing so far. Hey, you got no control over the real process. It might be a bit cheesy and a bit feety, and then also it's going to have like a sour, acidic edge on the end. But what's key about a lambic is that they can ram in a load of fruit for another fermentation process. So that's why there's the cherries prominent on the front, and I'll see if I can get from the side. There's also a date on the neck of a bottle. That's not to do with the beer, that is to do when the cherries were harvested. So you've got an idea, it gives an idea of how old the beer is, but then it also gives an idea of when the cherry harvest came through. And I suppose you can have a particular flavour. Like most things, fruit harvests, they change just like wine, just like barley, just like wheat. So there might be a classic year of Kriek Boon. So this particular beer, Kriek Boon, and it looks like it should be Boon in English, but that's how it's pronounced in Flemish. And Kriek is the Flemish word for cherry, or the Dutch word for cherry. So a Kriek Boon is very sort of like cherry by bone. Almost sounds like a perfume when you phrase it that way. It's quite a young brew. I mean, it's only been owned by Kriek Boon since 1975. He did buy out an existing brewer, and he's one of the lead figures. He's really tried to specialise in lambic beers, and he's a producer. You get producers and you get blenders, and then you get blender producers. But he manufactures this beer, and it'll be sold on to others who mix it together in like a bit more of like a whiskey style, which must be quite tricky. But the flavour, so that cheesy feet, slightly sour, slightly acidic beer is significantly changed here by the addition of 250 grams worth of late season sour Lambic cherries. That's per litre, so there's absolutely loads of cherries that have gone into this beer. They're late season, so they're packed full of sugar, chucked into the barrel, and so that's kicking off the fermentation all over again. But those cherries are obviously like really ripe and add in a very, what should be, I'm expecting to be a very tart, bitter, but also sweet cherry flavour. One of my favourite flavours in beers, so I'm quite looking forward to this. Kriek Boon owns, I think he owns about 0.5%. The other 50% is owned by Palm Breweries, which is another independent Belgian type of brewer. So they're out of the hands of Big Beer for now. This Kriek Boon was £3.75, I think, or £3.50 for a 375ml bottle in the local Waitrose. It's got a cork on the top in that cage. Cork and Cage, a excellent bar on Sturchley High Street if you are ever there. But the cork allows, a bit similar to wine, it allows oxygen into the top of this beer, so it can develop over time. And imagine the longer it's in this bottle, the less sweet, the more dry and probably slightly more tart is. But as 2023, I'm hoping this is going to be pretty ripe. It's recommended it's served in a tulip glass. So I've stolen one of Vicky Cam's wine glasses. Hopefully this is not going to pop and spill out all over the laptop. It should be a fairly flat beer. Lovely bit of gun smoke off the top there. Hits you in the face like a really yogurty cherry type of smell. And smells sweet rather than dry. Let's tip this into the glass. Cheers, everybody. There's a fair bit of fizz coming off that. It's producing a nice head. I'll leave a little bit in the bottle. So that for me is a very, very dark cherry red. Bit of fizz. It's crackling away in the glass. Lovely cherry smell off the top of it. I'll give a bit of a close up, but cheers, everyone. I forgot to add in, 2023 cherries might sound quite old, but they're frozen as soon as they get picked, so they're always available to be stuck into a beer. And they're obviously done over the winter months, so it's not, everything doesn't happen after harvest. They've got a good, 3 or 4 months worth of brewing. There's loads of cherry. It's a very light beer. It's only 4%, so even though it's probably undergone 3 fermentation processes, once after they've mashed it in the cool ships, again in the barrels, and then again when they've added the sugars, it's probably a 4th really once it's in the bottle, because that's an incredibly sweet beer. So I imagine there's still sugars and yeast present in there. That's why you get a little bit of fizz when you opened it. There's a slight tickle on the tongue. It's a very sort of pleasant carbonation taste that's just sort of like washing it over your taste buds. And there's a lovely sort of very mild cherry flavour. All that sourness that would have been in the original beer has just been really pared back by the cherry. So it's very, very sweet on the front of the tongue. But then just as you take it down at the back, I thought there'd be a bit more of a kick. I thought it'd be a bit more acidic, but there's a very sort of like nice bitterness from the hop, or maybe from the sourness of the cherry itself. That is very, very nice. Would it be a sessionable beer? I'd say it's lovely as a bit of a dessert beer. Very sweet, very, very drinkable. Is it particularly moreish? Maybe not. I'd say, if you're back when I was a teenager, as a kid, this might have been right down my throat. It's got a very much like a cordial Ribenery type of texture and flavour to it. And at 4%, younger palates might pick up on that sort of alcohol, but you can't recognise it at all. It's a lovely cherry flavour, but maybe have one more. I don't think you could get through it all in one night, but Lambic as a style, I'd imagine, given that it can vary from brew to brew to bottle, you could potentially have a cherry one. Then the framboise, which is like a raspberry type French leaning type of beer, or the goose, which is can be anything, can be champagne-y style, can be really fizzy, very complex. The addition of cherry in here is just uniform the beer, very sweet, cherry emphasis, and very quaffable. There's an example of Lambic, very, very nice. Get it while you can. Who knows, 20, 30 years time, it might not be something that you can still buy from that Brussels Zen Valley. But hopefully, a little bit of education while enjoying your beer. Lambic, I'll be having it again. Until the next time. Cheers, everybody.